The world has seen many bloodthirsty men in the last 100 years. However, only one of them was given a Nobel Prize for orchestrating the deaths of millions of people across the world. If you haven't figured it out already, I'm talking about Henry Kissinger, whose actions resulted in the deaths of 3 to 4 million people between 1969 and 1976.
How is it possible that this man is praised in China but considered a war criminal in Cambodia? Well, it might have a little something to do with a secret carpet bombing he directed, hidden from the American public for decades, and still affects Cambodians today. Henry Kissinger recently died at the age of 100. And in China, Kissinger is known to be responsible for brokering the official relationship between the United States and China that was set up during his secret trip to Beijing in 1971. This eventually paved the way for immense economic growth in China to become what it is today. Meanwhile, during the Vietnam War, Kissinger approved 3,875 bombing raids in Cambodia known as Operation Menu, where he said Vietnamese soldiers were hiding out. But in reality, it killed at least 50,000 Cambodian civilians. And importantly, it destabilized the country for decades to come.
But instead of facing any justice, he became the spokesperson of the New World Order.
For the first time in history, foreign policy has become global. Communications are instantaneous, and there exist problems which are genuinely not national, like environment, nuclear proliferation, and similar issues. So in this sense, we are living in a new world, and a new world order will emerge. The only question is whether it will arise out of intellectual and moral insight and by design, or whether it will be forced on mankind by a series of catastrophes.
And he kept talking about this New World Order theory for as long as he could speak.
There also exists an extraordinary opportunity to form for the first time in history a truly global society, carried by the principle of interdependence. The construction of a new world order. That's what this is about. And that's the sort of dialogue the Chinese are generally good at. You start by converting the whole world to our political philosophy. I don't think that can be done in 1 or 2 terms of an administration. That's a historic process.
Now, if you've read the title of this video, you might be wondering how Henry Kissinger is related to the Great Reset and the WEF. Well, here's where things get interesting. You see, before he oversaw the massacres in Cambodia and many other countries, Henry Kissinger was a faculty member at Harvard.
Henry Kissinger was always consulting. Seldom took his classes at Harvard. He had research assistants. Harvard has research assistants. Harvard is full of graduate students who are research assistants.
And you mentioned, David, Henry Kissinger, and I think he first was noticed by the Rockefeller family after he wrote a very erudite work on nuclear weapons and nuclear war back in the late 1950s.
Nuclear Wilsons and Foreign Policy.
Right.
Yes.
It was then published, and from that time on, he became pretty close to the Rockefeller family.
And this is where he met a fellow German named Klaus Schwab.
Yes, there was one seminar of Henry Kissinger, which really opened my eyes. I wasn't accepted to the seminar, but I sat in. I think he let me in because I was German.
Now, we don't know what kind of mentorship Henry gave to his young disciple, but in the 70s, while Henry was committing horrifying crimes, Mr. Schwab started an agency which would later be called the World Economic Forum. And even after decades, you can see how Henry's teachings formed the basic principles of this new agency.
Dr. Kissinger, our satellite time is running out. What wonderful opportunity to conclude our week here with such concrete proposals and ideas of how we can really create, I would say, a new world order.
But this isn't the 70s anymore, and people absolutely hate the term New World Order. So Klaus Schwab came up with something new, and he called it the Great Reset. Now, before I tell you what this Great Reset is, let me just show you what kind of ideas this guy has about the future of the world.
Dans ce nouveau monde, on doit accepter une transparence, et je dirais même une transparence totale. Tout va être transparent. Et il faut s'habituer, il faut se comporter ainsi.
Yeah, he's basically talking about shoving people into those surveillance towns, and we all know what happens to places that are chosen for this smart city project. I also want you guys to see what Klaus Schwab thinks about the future of elections.
But then the next step could be to go into a prescriptive mode, which means you do not even have to have elections anymore because you can already predict, and afterwards you can say, why do we need elections? Because we know what the result will be. Can you imagine such a world?
It's interesting that he's sitting next to Sergey Brin, whose ex-wife Nicole Shanahan has exposed how the WEF is pretty much using the billionaires and even their wives for this great reset.
What I don't think many of the tech mafia wives realize is that they were used to set the groundwork for what was called like the reset.
Now, Klaus Schwab also basically started the ESG movement, and people like Larry Fink were quick to help him out on this.
To drive future economic growth, we must embrace innovation and foster collaboration across sectors, regions, nations, and cultures to create a more peaceful, inclusive, sustainable, and resilient future.
Behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing we're asking companies. You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors.
They used their ESG models to create an energy crisis even in places like the US, which is a net energy exporter. And they did this by installing people like Joe Biden, who was against oil drilling even when his people were suffering because of high gas prices.
No more drilling on federal lands, no more drilling including offshore. No ability for the oil industry to continue to drill, period. Ends. Taking millions of automobiles off the road. No new fracking. Not another new coal plant will be built.
To top it off, BlackRock even used its market dominance to pretty much control the prices of coal, which came under fire when multiple attorney generals sued them for this monopoly. Now, keep in mind, all of this was happening when these leaders were advocating for lockdowns, even though studies show those restrictions didn't help in any meaningful way.
Well, stay-at-home orders were thought to be the best way to reduce the spread of COVID-19, but a new study suggests lockdowns did not work.
The only thing the lockdowns achieved was joblessness, and when everyone was suffering, Klaus Schwab kept preaching for the Great Reset.
History is truly at a turning point. Global energy systems, food systems, and supply chains will be deeply affected. The profound challenges to mankind, such as climate change, are globally interconnected and require collaborative responses.
And just to show you how much control this guy and his shadowy agency have over the world, let's hear what he has to say about the world leaders.
When I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. Mm-hmm. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
So basically, all the people who supported the ESG movement and the harsh lockdown policies were young WEF leaders. And let's not even get started on how some of those leaders pushed the world into never-ending wars in a few years. And this control didn't just end with politicians and businessmen. Apparently, even the Pope was aiding the WEF and their agenda.
The Fourth Revolution, terrorized by Klaus Schwab and the family of international finance, find in Bergoglio not a neutral spectator, which would itself already be an unheard of thing, but actually a zealous cooperator who abuses his own moral authority in order to support a destra outside the church the project of the dissolution of traditional society.
However, I think this is where these globalists made a miscalculation. They didn't expect so many countries to suddenly adopt more nationalistic policies. I mean, the fact that Donald Trump survived 2 assassination attempts and became president caused a lot of problems for the WEF, and Klaus Schwab even hinted at them.
Everybody would agree we never have lived in such turbulent times. There are deep transformations happening.
Another thing that hurt them was the sudden hatred people developed for entities like the WEF. So instead of harsher environmental policies, the U.S. is now abandoning all those environmental initiatives.
I terminated the ridiculous and incredibly wasteful Green New Deal. I call it the Green New Scam. Withdrew from the one-sided Paris Climate Accord and ended the insane and costly electric vehicle mandate. We're going to let people buy the car they want to buy. The United States has the largest amount of oil and gas of any country on earth, and we're going to use it. Not only will this reduce the cost of virtually all goods and services, it'll make the United States a manufacturing superpower.
We also have a president who has given a big shock to the global trade system by introducing tariffs, and you only have to listen to Larry Fink to see how much globalists hate this policy.
Well, I do believe the dollar will be weakened. I mean, most political theory is, or economic theory is, tariffs raise the value of the currency. I think it's going to weaken the dollar.
Now, since pretty much the entire world has collectively decided to shun the World Economic Forum, I'm not surprised to see how they've gotten rid of Klaus Schwab. However, if you think they're giving up on their globalist agenda, you're sorely mistaken. While they are looking for a new chairman, they're being led by a guy who doesn't think access to water is a basic human right. And they've already achieved a big victory by appointing yet another WEF puppet as the Prime Minister of Canada.
I think it is true, I'm just remembering this, that more than half of global emissions come from China and the US. Is that correct? I think it is about half.
Yeah, let's say that.
So they're not going to stop. And even if their 2030 agenda fails, they're just going to keep pushing their plans until we shut them down for good, or they finally achieve their great reset. Now, you guys wanted me to do a deeper dive, so I really want to know what you think about this research. Also, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on Henry Kissinger. So make sure you leave your comments down below. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and we'll catch you in the next one.